The Black Mountain stood silent under a blood-red sky, its surface made of jagged stone mixed with strange alien metal that seemed to pulse faintly, as if it were alive. The great gate at its base was carved with faces twisted in pain, faces of warriors who had entered and never returned. All around the base of the mountain, broken weapons, scorched armor, and bleached bones lay scattered like warning signs. The air was heavy, smelling of old blood and something far worse, something that made the skin crawl. Hundreds of beings from different worlds had gathered in a wide circle, their eyes fixed on the monstrous entrance. They had come to witness the start of this year's trial. The Death Labyrinth did not open often, but when it did, champions from across the galaxy came to prove themselves. This was not for glory. It was for survival, for power, and for a chance to claim the treasure said to be hidden in its heart. No one had ever succeeded. Every single challenger before had died inside. Among the crowd stood giants with 4 arms, insect-like warriors with razor limbs, and creatures that glowed with inner light. They wore shining armor and carried weapons that could split stone. Then there was one man, human, bareheaded with no visible armor. His clothes were simple, his weapon only a short blade strapped to his side. Hanging from his belt was a small brown pouch. His name was Ethan Cross. Whispers spread among the alien spectators. "A human? Is this a joke?" One tall reptilian warrior sneered. "He will be the first to die." Others laughed, their voices like grinding metal. Ethan heard them but did not react. He kept his gaze on the gate, his eyes calm but sharp, studying every detail. The gate's keepers arrived, towering figures in black armor with red eyes glowing through their helmets. They moved with heavy steps and carried massive spears that buzzed with energy. One of them stepped forward and spoke in a deep, booming voice that echoed across the plain. "Enter, if you dare. The labyrinth chooses its own path. The walls will move, the air will change, the ground will betray you. There is no map, there is no mercy." His gaze swept over the crowd of warriors. "If you wish to turn back, do it now." No one moved. Pride, greed, and courage held them in place. The keeper's voice deepened. "The gates will close behind you. They will not open again, unless you find the exit, and no one ever has." The ground trembled as the massive gates began to creak open, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. It was not silent inside. The tunnel breathed, exhaling a slow, chilling wind that smelled of decay. Somewhere far within, a faint grinding noise echoed like stone shifting against stone. The warriors stepped forward, one by one, crossing the threshold. Ethan waited, letting the others go first. He knew they would rush in, eager to prove their strength. That was their first mistake. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the gate and paused. His hand brushed the cold surface of the wall. The texture felt uneven, almost like it had been moved recently. A tall insectoid warrior pushed past him with a hiss. "Move, weakling." Ethan let him go, watching him vanish into the darkness. Only then did Ethan cross the line. The instant his boot touched the labyrinth's floor, a deep metallic groan came from above. The massive gates slammed shut with a sound like thunder. All light from the outside was gone. The only illumination came from faint blue lines running along the walls, pulsing slowly like veins. The temperature dropped, the air growing damp and heavy. Ethan took a slow breath, his eyes scanning the walls, the ceiling, and the floor. He reached into his pouch and touched something inside, a simple piece of chalk and a coil of string. The corners of his mouth twitched upward. The others charged ahead, their footsteps echoing. He stayed still, closing his eyes and pressing his palm flat against the wall. He waited. The faint vibrations under his skin told him what he needed to know. The walls were already moving, shifting the paths inside. In the distance, a scream tore through the air, followed by the sound of crushing stone. The labyrinth had claimed its first victim. Ethan opened his eyes. His heart was steady, his mind sharp. This was no ordinary trial. This was a living trap, and brute strength would not save anyone. He stepped forward slowly, each move deliberate, each breath measured. The labyrinth had killed everyone before him, but it had never faced a human with an earthborn trick. The darkness inside the labyrinth seemed thicker now, pressing in from all sides. The faint blue light from the walls was the only thing keeping the warriors from complete blindness. But even that light pulsed strangely, like the walls were breathing. Every few steps, a low rumble moved through the stone, as if something huge was shifting deep inside. The warriors ahead of Ethan moved fast, their weapons drawn. They wanted to be the first to find the treasure, to prove they were better than the rest. Their armor clinked, claws scraped the floor, and heavy boots echoed. But in this place, noise was a mistake. A shadow moved suddenly along the wall to Ethan's left. Before he could call out, sharp spikes shot from the floor, impaling two of the warriors who had stepped too far forward. The sound of metal tearing flesh was followed by their screams, then silence. The spikes withdrew into the ground as if nothing had happened, leaving only blood behind. The survivors began to panic. "It's a trap," one shouted. They rushed ahead faster, believing speed would save them. But the labyrinth did not care how fast they ran. It cared only that they made a wrong move. Ethan stayed behind, his eyes narrowing. He crouched and placed his hand against the cold stone wall again, feeling for something most would never notice. There, a faint vibration like the hum of machinery deep inside. It was strongest in certain spots, weaker in others. On Earth, miners had used this same trick to find hollow spaces behind rock. He had learned it from his grandfather when exploring old caves. He stepped away from the wall and took 3 slow steps forward. Just as he did, a heavy blade shot out from a hidden slit in the ceiling. It sliced the air exactly where his head would have been if he had moved with the others. The aliens behind him gasped. "You knew?" one asked, eyes wide. "I listened," Ethan said simply, then kept moving. The corridor split ahead into 2 paths, one to the left, one to the right. The left side glowed faintly brighter, almost like it was inviting them in. Several warriors immediately took that path, eager to follow the light. The right side looked darker, colder, less inviting. Ethan tilted his head. On Earth, bright light in a dangerous place usually meant one thing: a lure. He turned right without a word. 2 more warriors followed him, unsure if they were making the right choice. Behind them, the ones who had gone left suddenly screamed. The light had come from hidden openings in the walls, openings that released a rush of scorching flame. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. The 2 aliens with Ethan looked at him with new respect. "How did you know?" one asked. "I didn't," Ethan replied, "but I know traps like to be obvious." They moved on, the air getting colder with each step. The floor beneath them was slick now, wet with moisture that dripped from the ceiling. The sound of water echoed somewhere ahead, but it was strange, too regular, like a machine making the noise on purpose. A deep, grinding sound came from behind them. The wall at the far end of the corridor began to move, sliding toward them like a giant stone crusher. The 2 aliens panicked and sprinted forward, their claws scraping the wet floor. Ethan moved faster too, but not wildly. He kept his eyes on the edges of the walls. There had to be a gap, a seam, something. Just before the moving wall could reach them, Ethan spotted a narrow slit on the right. Without thinking, he shoved both aliens through it, then dove inside himself. The slit led into a small side passage, barely wide enough for them to stand. The crushing wall passed by outside, scraping stone on stone with a deafening roar. The 2 aliens were breathing hard. You saved us." Ethan didn't answer. He was already pulling out a small piece of chalk from his pouch and marking the wall. He knew the labyrinth could twist and change, but he needed to leave signs for himself. Tiny scratches and lines that no alien would notice, but that he could read later. The passage they were in sloped downward, the air growing even colder. Ahead, they could hear voices, low whispers in a language that shifted between alien tongues. The 2 aliens looked at each other nervously. "They're survivors," one said. "We should join them." Ethan's eyes hardened. On Earth, in the wilderness, if you heard someone calling your name from the shadows, it was never a friend. Predators used voices to lure prey closer. He pressed his finger to his lips, motioning for silence, and began to back away from the sound. The aliens hesitated but followed. Moments later, the whispers turned into screams, then a loud, wet crunch as if something massive had snapped shut. Ethan didn't look back. The labyrinth had claimed more lives, but it would not have his. Not yet. The passage narrowed ahead, the walls bending inward as if trying to push intruders back. The faint blue light along the stone flickered, leaving sudden moments of near total darkness. In that darkness, a sound began, soft at first, almost like a sigh. Then it grew, whispering words that twisted between different languages, sometimes familiar, sometimes alien. The voices called out to the warriors, using their names. The two aliens with Ethan froze. "Someone's alive in there." One whispered, "We have to help." Their voices shook, not just from fear, but from the strange pull in the whispers. It felt as if the sound was not just in the air, but inside their heads, pushing them to move forward. Ethan didn't move. On Earth, his grandfather had taught him that when you were deep in the forest and heard your name whispered by something unseen, you never followed. "Predators call before they strike," his grandfather had said. This place was no different. He stepped sideways, pressing his back to the wall, motioning for the others to do the same. They hesitated, torn between instinct and reason, but when Ethan gave them a hard look, they obeyed. Slowly, they backed away from the direction of the voices. The whispers grew sharper, angrier, as if realizing their prey was escaping. Then a sudden slam shook the floor. Stone blocks fell from the ceiling, sealing the hallway they had just avoided. And the blocks weren't random, they formed teeth. The corridor had been a mouth, and it had just bitten down. The two aliens stared at Ethan with wide eyes. "It was a trap," one said in disbelief. He didn't answer, just kept moving deeper into the labyrinth, leaving small chalk marks along the floor as they went. The air grew colder, and every few minutes a faint grinding noise echoed in the distance, followed by short bursts of silence. They came to a fork. One path curved upward toward faint light, the other sloped downward into deeper shadow. The upward path looked safer, more open, but Ethan noticed something. No sound came from that way. The lower path carried a soft breeze, the smell of damp stone, and a faint drip of water. Airflow meant space. Space meant movement. Movement meant possible exits. He started down the lower path. The aliens groaned but followed. The slope grew steeper, the floor slick with moisture. The walls here were different, smooth, almost polished, with strange circular holes scattered across the surface. Ethan slowed, studying them. They weren't natural. A faint hiss came from one of the holes. A dart shot out, grazing the shoulder of the alien behind Ethan. The alien cried out as the wound sizzled. Ethan grabbed him and yanked him forward, moving quickly past the walls. He recognized the setup. It was like an old Earth blowgun trap, only deadlier. They turned another corner and found themselves in a massive chamber. The ceiling was lost in shadow, and the floor was covered in strange tiles, each one carved with symbols from dozens of alien languages. In the center, a huge stone statue loomed, its mouth open wide, a faint green glow coming from inside. The two aliens moved toward it, thinking it might be the way out. Ethan grabbed one by the arm. "Don't step on the wrong tile," he warned, his eyes scanning the symbols. Most were meaningless to him, but a few were numbers, and numbers could form patterns. He crouched, studying the sequence on the tiles in front of him. Paternos. The pattern was a puzzle designed to force intruders into a deadly step. Ethan traced a safe path with his finger, then began to move across it, testing each tile with his foot before committing his weight. Halfway across, one of the aliens ignored him and jumped ahead. The tile he landed on sank slightly, and a spear shot from the wall, piercing his chest. He fell without a sound. The remaining alien froze in horror. Ethan finished the path, reached the statue, and peered inside the glowing mouth. It wasn't an exit, it was another passage, narrow and winding, the green light fading deeper within. He turned back to the surviving alien. "Follow my steps exactly, or you die next," he said. The alien obeyed, trembling as he copied Ethan's path. When he reached the other side, they stepped into the statue's mouth together. The air grew warmer again, and somewhere far ahead, Ethan could hear the faint sound of moving water. In this place, every sound was a clue, and every clue might be the difference between life and death. The passage inside the statue's mouth was so narrow that Ethan and the alien behind him had to turn sideways to move forward. The green glow that had lit the entrance faded quickly, swallowed by thick darkness. The only sound was the faint drip of water echoing from somewhere ahead. Each step felt heavier, the air thicker. They emerged into a wider chamber, but this one was different. The walls were covered in strange carvings, beasts with too many eyes, warriors frozen in poses of terror, and spirals that seemed to twist when you stared at them too long. In the center of the room, something moved. A low growl rumbled from the shadows. A massive creature stepped into the faint blue light, a beast that looked like a mix between a panther and a centipede. Its Its long body rippled with muscle, its many legs gripping the stone floor with sharp claws. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and strands of drool hung from its jaws. The alien beside Ethan gasped and reached for his weapon, but Ethan held out an arm to stop him. He had already noticed something. The creature's nostrils flaring, sniffing the air, reacting to their scent. This wasn't just a random predator. It was guarding something. The beast took a step forward, its claws scratching against the floor, the sound echoing through the chamber. Ethan moved slowly, his hands slipping into the pouch at his side. He pulled out a small cloth bag tied with a thin cord. Inside was fine white powder, pepper, and old earth spice. When the beast lunged, Ethan snapped the bag open and flung the powder directly into its face. The effect was instant. The creature roared in pain, thrashing wildly, its claws tearing at the ground. Its glowing eyes shut tight as it tried to rub the burning powder from its nostrils. "Run!" Ethan barked, grabbing the alien's arm and pulling him toward a narrow passage on the opposite side of the chamber. They darted through just as the beast slammed its body against the wall, shaking the ground. The corridor beyond twisted sharply, forcing them into another small room. This one was lit by faint shafts of light coming from cracks high above. The floor was strange. It seemed to move in tiny shifts beneath their feet. Ethan crouched and pressed his hand to it. It wasn't stone. It was a series of connected panels, each balanced like a trapdoor. He tested one panel with his foot. It tilted slightly but didn't drop. Another, however, shifted dangerously, and he could hear faint clicking beneath it. He stepped back quickly. The alien frowned. "What now?" Ethan studied the pattern on the panels. Some had fine cracks running along the edges, others were perfectly smooth. The cracked ones were weaker. He mapped a path in his mind, stepping only on the strong panels. Halfway across, the alien hesitated. "I can't do it," he muttered. "You can," Ethan said firmly. "Just follow me exactly." They moved slowly, their steps echoing in the still air. One wrong move would mean falling into whatever waited below. Ethan could hear faint hissing under the floor, the kind of sound snakes made before striking. Finally, they reached solid ground on the other side. The alien let out a shaky breath, but Ethan didn't relax. The labyrinth would not give them long before the next trap. Ahead, the passage sloped upward into another chamber. This one was filled with a low mist that clung to the floor, hiding it from view. In the center stood a pedestal holding a smooth black orb. The air was warmer here, and there was a faint hum, almost like a heartbeat. The alien's eyes widened. "The treasure?" Ethan shook his head. "Too easy." He picked up a loose stone and tossed it onto the floor ahead. The mist parted as the stone fell and vanished into a hidden pit lined with spikes. The mist swirled back, hiding the danger again. The alien's mouth went dry. "If we can't see the floor..." "We don't need to," Ethan interrupted, pulling the coil of string from his pouch. He tied one end to a jagged rock and tossed it ahead. The string lay across the floor, showing where it remained supported and where it dipped into traps. Step by step, they made their way across, careful to keep their feet only where the string stayed level. When they reached the pedestal, Ethan didn't touch the orb. Instead, he examined the base and found a faint groove, just enough space to hide a thin blade. He pulled his knife and slid it into the groove. A click echoed, and the floor around the pedestal locked into place. Only then did he lift the orb. The hum stopped instantly, and the mist began to fade. From somewhere deep within the labyrinth, a deep rumble rolled through the stone, as if the place itself had noticed his success. Ethan tightened his grip on the orb. The labyrinth would not let them go easily now. The rumble from deep inside the labyrinth did not fade. It grew louder, rolling through the walls and floor until dust drifted down from above. Ethan tightened his grip on the black orb, his eyes scanning the chamber for movement. The alien with him took a step back, fear in his eyes. From the far end of the room, a wall slid open with a slow, grinding noise, revealing a long corridor lit by a strange red glow. The air rushing from it was hot and smelled faintly of burning metal. Ethan knew without question that the labyrinth was forcing them into another test, this one more dangerous than the last. They stepped inside, the heat wrapping around them instantly. The corridor sloped downward, the walls narrowing as they went. Red light flickered ahead, casting shifting shadows that made it look as though the walls themselves were bending and twisting. The deeper they went, the more the sound of rushing liquid filled the air. When they reached the end, they found themselves standing on a narrow stone ledge overlooking a vast chasm. Below them was a river, not of water, but of molten metal, glowing orange and gold, its surface bubbling and hissing. Spanning the river were 3 bridges, each made of a different material, one of rough stone, one of thin metal plates, and one of thick rope and wood. The alien stepped toward the stone bridge, but Ethan pulled him back. He picked up a small pebble from the ledge and tossed it onto the nearest section of the stone bridge. The pebble had barely touched before the entire section crumbled away into the molten flow. "The labyrinth wants us to guess," Ethan muttered. He turned his attention to the metal bridge. It looked stronger, but the heat from below shimmered in the air around it. He tore a small strip from his shirt and tossed it onto the metal. Within seconds, the cloth burst into flames. That left the rope bridge. It swayed slightly in the hot wind, the wood dark and cracked from age. It seemed like the least safe choice, but Ethan noticed something. The wood had deep grooves, as if something had been dragged over it many times before. That meant others had crossed it and survived. He tested the first plank with his weight. It held. Slowly, step by step, they crossed. The heat below made the sweat sting in their eyes, and the ropes creaked with every movement. At one point, a plank gave way beneath the alien's foot, and he had to grab the rope to keep from falling. Ethan pulled him up, and they continued. When they reached the other side, the heat faded instantly, replaced by cool air and the faint scent of fresh water. They found themselves in a wide circular room with walls covered in smooth black stone. In the center stood a tall pillar with a shallow bowl at its top. Water dripped slowly into the bowl from cracks in the ceiling. The alien moved toward it, but Ethan held up a hand. "Too easy again," he said. He crouched and examined the floor around the pillar. His fingers found a thin wire stretched just above the surface. It connected to small holes in the walls, trap mechanisms. Ethan reached into his pouch and pulled out the coil of string again. He tied one end to a small stone and carefully looped the other end around the wire. Then he stepped back and pulled. The wire snapped, and the walls erupted with movement as dozens of arrows shot out, clattering harmlessly against the far wall. With the trap spent, Ethan approached the pillar. He dipped his fingers into the water and tasted it, cool and clean. They both drank deeply, the first real relief they'd felt since entering the labyrinth. But their rest didn't last long. The black orb in Ethan's hand pulsed suddenly, a faint light glowing from within. The glow matched a faint pattern etched into the far wall, an outline of a door. Ethan walked over, pressed the orb into the outline, and the wall began to split down the middle. Beyond was another passage, but this one was different. The air was fresh, the ground was smooth, and faint sunlight seemed to leak in from somewhere ahead. The alien's face lit up with hope. "We're close to the exit." Ethan didn't answer. He had learned long ago that in places like this, the path that seemed safe was often the deadliest. He stepped forward cautiously, his hand never leaving the hilt of his blade, ready for whatever the labyrinth still had planned. The smooth, fresh-smelling corridor stretched ahead, its floor polished like glass. Sunlight glimmered faintly in the distance, spilling in through a narrow opening. The alien at Ethan's side almost smiled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since they had entered. Ethan did not relax. Every instinct told him this was wrong. The labyrinth would never make the exit so simple. He slowed his pace, crouching to study the floor. At first, it seemed solid, but then he noticed faint hairline cracks forming perfect rectangles. Pressure plates. He pulled a coin-sized pebble from his pouch and tossed it onto one of the cracked tiles. The instant it landed, a section of the wall hissed open and a spear shot across the corridor, striking the opposite wall with enough force to split the stone. The alien flinched back, his face pale. "Walk only where I walk," Ethan warned. He traced a winding path, stepping carefully over the dangerous tiles. The air here was still, heavy with tension. Every few steps, he tested the floor with a light tap of his boot before committing his weight. Halfway through, the corridor shuddered. The sound of grinding stone filled the air as sections of the floor began to slide away, revealing deep pits lined with spikes. Ethan moved faster now, guiding the alien through the safe spots until they reached a wide archway. Beyond the arch was a massive circular chamber. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness, but sunlight poured in from a single hole directly above the center of the room. In the middle stood a large, ornate door, clearly the way out. But between them and that door was an enormous pattern of stone tiles, each marked with strange alien symbols. Ethan studied it, recognizing the layout. It was like a massive chessboard. His mind went back to his childhood, when his grandfather taught him the knight's move in chess: 2 steps in one direction, 1 step to the side. It was a pattern designed to avoid the traps hidden under certain tiles. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the path. Then he stepped forward, landing precisely on the first safe tile. The alien hesitated. "How do you know where to step?" "Because I've seen this puzzle before," Ethan replied, not looking back. "Just not here." They moved across the board, Ethan guiding each step. Twice, the alien almost faltered, his foot brushing against the edge of a deadly tile, but Ethan caught his arm in time. Once, a tile they avoided suddenly collapsed into a black pit, proving Ethan's caution right. Finally, they reached the last row of tiles. Ethan stepped onto the platform before the door, feeling the ground rise slightly as if recognizing his victory. The massive door rumbled, gears clicking and locks sliding free. But before it could open fully, the ground trembled violently. From the shadows above, a shape began to descend, a guardian made of stone and metal, its glowing eyes fixed on them. It was massive, its arms ending in jagged blades. The door was the exit, but the labyrinth would not let them leave without one last fight. The alien drew his weapon in panic, but Ethan's eyes flicked around the room. Fighting head-on would be suicide. Instead, he spotted thin ropes dangling from the Guardian's shoulder joints, control cables. If he could cut those, the machine's arms would be useless. When the Guardian lunged, Ethan dodged left, rolling to avoid a blade strike that shattered the floor where he had stood. He drew his short knife and sprinted toward the dangling rope, leaping onto the Guardian's leg and climbing quickly. The alien shouted, distracting the machine with wild attacks that kept it from focusing fully on Ethan. Ethan reached the shoulder and slashed the first rope. The Guardian's right arm dropped, limp and useless. It roared, a sound of grinding stone, and spun, trying to throw him off. Ethan held tight, moving across its back to the other side. Another quick slash, and the second arm went dead. Now defenseless, the Guardian staggered backward, its own weight throwing it off balance. With a final lurch, it crashed into the floor, breaking apart in a cloud of dust and sparks. The door opened fully, revealing sunlight, fresh air, and the sound of wind. Ethan stepped through first, scanning for more traps. The alien followed, blinking in the brightness. They had beaten the final chamber. But as Ethan glanced back one last time, he saw the labyrinth's dark entrance already sealing itself shut, as if it were alive and waiting for the next challenger foolish enough to enter. The sunlight outside the labyrinth felt strange, almost unreal after the endless darkness and shifting walls. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of grass and wind. The alien warrior at Ethan's side tilted his head back, letting the light touch his face, but Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the ground ahead. Even out here, he didn't trust the labyrinth to let them go without one last trick. Behind them, the giant black doors rumbled as they began to close, sealing the entrance with a deep, echoing thud. The ground beneath their feet trembled faintly, as though the entire mountain had exhaled. For a brief moment, silence hung in the air. Then, from the shadow of the tree line beyond, figures began to emerge. Armored alien guards, their armor bearing the same black and red markings as the labyrinth's keepers, stepped into view. Their weapons were raised, their eyes locked on Ethan. One of them spoke in a cold, metallic voice. "Return the orb. No outsider may claim it." The alien who had survived beside Ethan took a step back, fear in his eyes. "Ethan, they won't let us leave." Ethan tightened his grip on the black orb, its faint glow pulsing against his palm. "Then we don't leave it with them," he said quietly. The guards moved in a slow circle surrounding them. Ethan's mind was already working. There were too many to fight head-on. But as the circle tightened, he noticed something about the ground between him and the trees. Scattered stones covered with dry leaves, a slope that led toward a shallow drop. On Earth, he had used such slopes to send pursuers tumbling. When the nearest guard lunged, Ethan sidestepped and shoved him hard toward the slope. The heavy armor made the guard lose balance, crashing into two others. Before the rest could react, Ethan grabbed the alien warrior's arm and ran straight for the gap. They sprinted across the uneven ground, leaves scattering underfoot. The slope worked just as Ethan hoped. Two more guards slipped, their armor clanging as they slid down. The survivors chased, but Ethan was already weaving between the trees, using the thick roots and low branches to slow their pursuit. After several minutes of running, the sound of pursuit faded. They stopped by a stream, both breathing heavily. The alien warrior looked at him in disbelief. "You could have given them the orb. Why didn't you?" Ethan turned the black sphere in his hands. "Because this isn't just a treasure, it's a key, and if they're that desperate to keep it, it means it opens something they don't want found." The alien's eyes widened. "Another labyrinth?" "Or something worse," Ethan said. They followed the stream for hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the labyrinth. As the sun began to set, they reached a cliff that overlooked the valley. From here, the mountain with the labyrinth loomed in the distance, its shadow stretching across the land like a warning. The alien warrior glanced at Ethan. "You really are different from the others who entered. Every one of them trusted their strength or weapons. You trusted your mind." Ethan gave a faint smile. "Strength fades, ammo runs out, but the right trick lasts forever." They made camp under the trees, the black orb resting between them. Its faint light pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and patient, as if waiting for the next challenge. Ethan knew their journey wasn't over. The labyrinth had let them go, but the game was far from finished. Somewhere out there, the real reason for this deadly trial still waited, and when the time came, he would be ready. In the distance, far beyond the trees, the ground shook once more, so faintly it could have been mistaken for wind. But Ethan heard it for what it was, a promise. The labyrinth remembered him, and it wanted him back.